What I'd like to do today is go back through and continue to talk about multiples and look at multiples from their algebraic construction again, and then kind of take something apart, re-engineer it so that we can see why it might be doing what it's doing in terms of inferring some level or rate of growth. Okay? I think that will better help you understand the import of what a multiple is and does. So we'll do that. We'll look at an example of creating value or doing a valuation model using multiples, the forward market multiple method. And then I'm going to distribute to you the next problem set that's due next Wednesday, and we'll spend some time working on it. I think there will be time to spend time working. Okay. So before I go into any of that, though, I believe you have a couple of items due today. Any questions or issues that I can help you with or we can address on those items? I believe it's a problem set and an Excel assignment. Yeah.
I need to pull up exactly, but it was on the ICP. With WAC and calculating debt. I remember I looked at my beginning Farm Hill Group Excel, and for some reason I didn't have an equation plugged in there. And so I got some help from some classmates on what equation you need to do, but I was struggling to find, let me pull it up, sorry, I should have had it ready. On pretty much how to calculate debt, but
Sure.
It was the first part of the equation I couldn't find in my financials.
No problem at all. And you'll connect to this almost immediately, Bruno.
Okay.
So in this case, I believe we have some bonds, and I believe we have some non-bond debt. I think it was maybe a mortgage. Is that right? Okay. And it's just those two items, right? In the long-term debt? Okay. So to identify the debt balance, the market value of debt, so that you can then get an appropriate weighting, so you can get an appropriate WACC, what we first look at then is the market value of each of the bonds. And so you know the coupon rate that's giving a payment for the bonds, you know a current yield, you know a face value, you know a periods per year, and you know how many years are left on the bonds.
Okay.
And with that, you would then use the bond value equation to identify a per bond value.
Okay, and that's the one because I just put it in my Excel and I think it was already there, and so.
Yeah, it could have been.
But,
so you get a per bond value, then make sure you know how many bonds there are. Do I remember correctly that there's $35 million of book value of bonds in this one? Or is it some other number altogether? Whatever the number is, you take the book value of the bonds, divide them by the face value per bond to give you the number of bonds, right? And then that number of bonds you multiply by the per bond market value to get the market value of the bonds. And to that, you're going to add the book value of the mortgage. Why are we adding a book value of the mortgage rather than market value of the mortgage? Cole, do you remember?
Why we don't add the book value to, sorry, I missed that.
Why do we add the book value of the mortgage to the market value of the bonds rather than a market value of the mortgage to the market value of the bonds?
Because the book value of the mortgage is going to be our market?
Is what we're taking as market value, exactly, because we don't have any other reasonable instrument to give us market value of mortgages. Yeah, exactly.
Is that across the board, or is that just because of our particular situation?
That's a good question. I think we would have to accept that for this kind of work, valuation estimation, it's going to be across the board. I mean, there could be some unusual circumstances. For example, if you happen to know that the mortgage on let's say a warehouse in your business, the mortgage on that warehouse is in trouble because the warehouse's market value in the real estate market is $5 million, but your mortgage is $7 million. So it's upside down. Well, you now know that you have an issue there, and maybe in that situation you would adjust that value of the mortgage because you know it's not worth its book value. Okay, and we have seen those scenarios, right? We saw them not too many years ago. But other than those, I think we would take the book value as being the market value of the mortgage, largely because it's unusual for someone to buy someone else's mortgage. And when we buy it, we would set a market value, right? So if Alex has a mortgage on a piece of property for his business, let's say it's a $7 million mortgage on that property, and it's held by Ryan's bank, well, it's pretty unusual for me to go to Ryan's bank and buy that mortgage from Ryan, right? Maybe Ryan has included it in a big pool of mortgages that have gone out to the capital markets, and it may have been sold off in little bits and pieces that way. But it's really unusual for an individual investor to go and set a market price of the mortgage by buying it from whoever is holding it. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, good question. So again, make sure that as you're finishing up the Excel assignment, that you have integrated into your spreadsheet multiple worksheets that are interacting with each other, rather than typing over and over and over again. I was working with a couple of you yesterday, late afternoon, early evening, just before I left, I think, and that integration still hadn't happened yet. You want that integration to happen, not just for this particular assignment, but what you're effectively building is a comprehensive model that you can utilize to do any valuation structure. And I'll show you this as we bring up the computer in a few minutes. I know you've seen it before, but I want to make sure that you really get it. What other questions on the two assignments? Zach?
In calculating ROIC, we were taking, for the continuing value, right? So you want it to be at...
Are you on the problem set of the Excel assignment?
The ICP.
Got it. In fact, one of you actually discussed this with me. Was it you, Sherry? Okay. And so now, Sherry, you're not going to have to bring it up. Remember me asking you to bring it up today? Okay, keep going.
I'm just wondering why we're taking the values from 2017
Yeah.
when we're trying to, because that's not the continuation.
It's not the best way to do it, right? So what he's talking about is in your continuation form for the KVD model, right? So we're trying to find a continuing value, and it's no plat times 1 minus G divided by ROIC divided by WACC minus G, right? And we know all of these other numbers, but we don't know ROIC for the first year of the continuation, or the year after the last year of the explicit doing. Remember me telling you earlier in the semester that sometimes you simply have to use the best information available to you? And this is one of those times. Zach, remind me what the ROIC was in the base year, which I think is 2016?
Well, we don't have it for that year. We calculated it and it's like 12.8%.
I thought you did have it for the base year.
No, you haven't got.
Did the calculation?
How did you calculate?
Using,
That's
Using
plus.
2017.
Yeah, the cap note, and then I got it, and that's the cap note, and then.
Okay, so but that's how we have it for the base year, right? I'm missing something from that.
it's not given.
No, the number's not given.
Yeah.
The inputs to the number are given.
There you go.
By the way, when the inputs to the number are given, we have the number, okay? We have the number. You may have to figure out where we have the number, but I promise you we have the number. So what was the number then, Zach?
Did you guys get like 12.8%?
12.514%.
Okay, that's about what I was thinking from having looked at this with Sherry yesterday. Under what conditions will the firm's ROIC change over time? Ryan?
Increasing returns to scale.
Increasing returns to scale. Constant returns to scale, ROIC will remain constant, because that is where we most effectively see our return in this kind of scenario, right? I don't think you have any information that would suggest to you that this firm is experiencing increasing or decreasing returns to scale. When in the absence of information that tells you something, you have to assume constancy. If you don't know something is changing, you must assume it is not changing, okay? Otherwise, you'll get yourself really backwards really quickly. So, that being the case, we can realistically expect that this firm's ROIC isn't changing. Which means if we're using the ROIC from what looks like the base year, and it doesn't change over time, then the ROIC that we're actually using here is for the first year of the continuation period, if we're assuming this didn't change. So you can make those assumptions. But as Sherry and I were speaking yesterday, it became clear to me that that connection, even though not a terribly difficult connection to make, wasn't necessarily an obvious one to make. And so I'm going to update this problem set to suggest this. And this is why when Sherry and I were talking about it, I said, Sherry, make sure that you bring this up tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, Vincent, can we go through, or can someone kind of share their inputs into calculating no plat then? Because did we take the given no plat for 2017?
I think you simply have no plan.
We have no plat for
We
all
have
the
no plat
years.
for 2017, we don't have it for.
Or do you have to calculate no plat for 2016 as well?
Hang on.
Right, that's what I did, and then I
And then-
still.
Did you get 49,000?
Well, yeah, so no plat for 2017.
2016.
Hang on. Okay, so I'm just looking at this quickly rather than having everything you guys have been thinking about for the last few days. Remind me if you would, I give you, yeah, so I give you no plat for 2017, right on the face. And I give it to you all the way down through 2022. So you don't have to calculate it.
No, you actually
Well,
have to
we do.
calculate no plat for 2016, because the ROIC is based on 2016's number, not.
Oh, okay, but 2016, the no plat is available to you because you have EBIT for 2016 and you have a tax rate.
Yeah, I just went through it and I.
Okay, all right, very good. Anything else? Okay, so as we talked about multiples the other day, what equational form did I say that we could use to determine what a multiple should be? Let's think about the EBIT multiple. I'm not talking about this equational form, EV over EBIT. Do you remember me giving you an equational form other than that we were then able to identify was equal to this? Yeah, Brennan?
Is it EV equals the no plat?
Yeah, so we're going to start with that. So we're starting with the form that is the KVD form of a continuing value, right? Okay. So if we've got EV, use a different color. I was hoping to find blue, and I don't find it. So if we've got enterprise value, which is what we estimate when we estimate a value, right? Being equal to no plat. Times 1 minus G divided by ROIC divided by WACC minus G. So if we know that and we want to turn this into enterprise value divided by EBIT, we simply have to find a way to divide both sides by EBIT. And we do that by deconstructing no plat, which we know is EBIT times 1 minus a tax rate. And once we've done that, now we can easily divide enterprise value by EBIT by dividing by both sides, and EBIT disappears from up here. Okay? And that's probably fairly obvious to you if you think about it once or twice. What we didn't do is go to the next step. I said you could use this and you can solve for G. And we talked about solving for G a little bit in terms of what I think of as that G solution. But I want to think about this again and solve for G, actually using a different but similar equational form, and then really think about what that G is representing to us. If I tell you that a company's EV/EBIT multiple is equal to 12.74. Does that immediately tell you anything about the growth rate, of the expected growth rate of the company's cash flow? Not immediately, right? If I tell you that you can find that, it's in there, does that sound realistic to you? Yeah, I would hope so. If you had a multiple that was 15, would you expect that multiple to have a higher or lower growth rate built into it than a multiple of 12.74? Well, think about it commonsensically. If the multiple is higher, then we must have a higher growth rate expected to warrant a higher multiple. Because a higher multiple is going to end up in a higher valuation, right? You're going to take EBIT times a bigger number is going to give you a bigger value. In order to get a bigger value, when the EBIT is constant, then the growth rate must be greater. Or a lesser multiple would suggest a lesser growth rate. Okay? Well, fine. I think we can get our heads around this. Let's get our heads around a slightly different version of this. Let me see if I like that color. No, I don't love that one. I want to have a different color here. That's better. Would we agree that some enterprise value or value that we are calculating, estimating, could be equal to FCF at time 1 divided by WACC minus G? Okay, I would think that's reasonable. Could we then similarly agree that we would hope that the KVD form of continuing value and the free cash flow form of continuing value would give us the same value? That'd be nice, right? We know that sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, and this G and ROIC interaction is the culprit as to why it doesn't always give us a nicely aligned value, right? Is that a hand, Zach? No, okay. But we would like to think that these two numbers can be the same if we're talking about the same company. Because why would two different equations give us a different value for the exact same asset, right? Okay. In which case, I think we might even be able to say that this equality should be able to exist. If the asset is the asset and it has a value that should be equal based upon whichever metric we use, then the metrics should equal each other. Fair enough? Zach?
Wouldn't that only be true if our cash flow was the same?
Well, it is, because the no plat here is built into this, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, and it's true if the G is the same. It's true, and the G and ROIC are aligned well. Remember that that's the culprit that gives us misaligned values sometimes. Okay? But we would be having to make those assumptions. And in this case, we clearly see that the G is the same, because G is G. We haven't said G and G prime, we've just said G. So the only thing then that we're really having to think about is this return on invested capital as being the differentiating factor. So I think in one of your last problem sets, or one of the items you turned in, you had to give me some discussion as to why the KVD model was giving a different value than the FCF model. And you guys gave me a whole range of different items, if I remember correctly. And I came back to some of you and said, well, remember the ROIC is involved here, G is involved here. And if ROIC isn't large enough, then G can't be the size that it is. What do I mean by that? Why is ROIC and G so intrinsically tied? So Bobby, you've got your corporation. and you are absolutely confident that your corporation is going to grow in the future at 12%. That's a big G, right? Okay. And I don't know if that's a 5-year future or an 80-year future. It doesn't even matter for this discussion. But you're confident it's going to grow at 12%. Where are you going to get the money to invest in the company to let it grow at that 12%? Can we agree that for your company to grow like that, it's going to need some capital? Okay, that it's going to use money at some time. You're either investing in marketing programs or salespeople or production efficiencies or new production capacity so that you can produce more. Money's got to be in this equation somewhere. Where's it going to come from?
Shareholders?
Okay, so we might go out to new shareholders and ask for new equity capital, right? We might go out to new debt holders and ask for new debt capital. Is there any other place that it could come from?
A bank?
Well, and that would be debt. Okay, but you're right. Yeah, a bank would be a source of debt for us. Yeah. Any place else?
Personal funding? I mean, I don't know if that's too outrageous.
Well, it could be personal, but if it's personal funding from, say, me or Bobby as the two stakeholders in the company, we're either going to buy more stock or we're going to loan the company money. So again, that's equity or debt. The great big elephant in the room one that's obvious is escaping you at the moment.
Are you talking about like money in the form of equipment getting put back?
I don't think so, if I understand what you mean. Is it feasible for a firm to fund its own expansion through its own cash? Yeah, sure it is. Sure it is. But for that to be the case, retained earnings have to have been accumulating, right? Where do retained earnings come from? Return on invested capital. Okay. So if return on invested capital isn't high enough, there's not enough accumulation of retained earnings to give us enough cash capacity to fund this growth. So the company's growth is limited, assuming there are no ability to get new equity capital or new debt. The company's growth is limited by its retained earnings, which is a function of ROIC over the years. That's not an immediate connection that you make when you think about this stuff. But I'd like you to try to think that way, okay, when we're thinking about multiples. So in this case, ROIC and G, we say, are the culprits, but really it's the relationship between G and ROIC that are the culprits that cause these two values to sometimes differentiate. Okay? So in this case, let's think about how this might actually work for us. Let's think about some numbers that we can use to identify what growth rate is built into a multiple, okay, and how to tease it out of that. I got my cheat sheet here just so as I go through the numbers or the structure, I don't mess it up. So think about this, and I'm going to start with the entirety of the free cash flow model and make the assumption that it is equal to the entirety of the KVD model. Fair enough? If the asset has a value, then that should be true. So if we're going to say the sum of free cash flows at times I divided by 1 plus, I'm going to call it R here, to the T, plus free cash flow at time 1 divided by R minus G divided by 1 plus R to the T. If that's going to be equal to the sum of the free cash flows at times I divided by 1 plus R to the T plus no plat times 1 minus G divided by ROIC divided by R minus G divided by 1 plus R to the T. So that would be, we would say that's true, right? Now what we want to do is we want to start to boil this thing down so we can solve for G. Okay? And that would give us a G solution. Right? Let's think about it. Make sure that I go down the right road here. If we extend it a step further and say, well, if these two equations provide the same result, because the asset is worth what the asset is worth, we can use any valuation model and say that it's equal to either of these, right? So let's extend this to the forward market multiple model. Remember that that forward market multiple model is simply, so the values in the FMM, the sum of the free cash flows times I divided by 1 plus R to the T plus M, whatever our multiple is, times EBIT divided by 1 plus R to the T, right? Why is this a credible version of a continuing value? Why is a multiple times EBIT a credible version of a continuing value? Please.
That's what someone else was willing to pay for the similar thing, right?
Maybe. Here's what we know is EV divided by EBIT equal to some multiple? Sure. I mean, it's a ratio, right? Is enterprise value a continuing value? When we estimate the continuing value, aren't we estimating the enterprise value at that point in time? Sure. Okay. And I can just rearrange this algebraically to say enterprise value is then equal to M times EBIT, which then is what allows us to do this. That's why this is credible. It's easier than you think, right? It's a very simplistic model, which is why I said the other day it's kind of a bold model to use. It's a broad brushstroke. And even though it's the most commonly used form, I think it is the most commonly misunderstood form as well. So I think most of those people that use it don't understand how to tease G out of it. Is that a question?
Yeah, isn't it very easy to be fooled by like a bull market and that sort, and start overestimating if you only look at the multiple?
Well, absolutely it is. Yeah, that's why I say it's a bold model to use, right? It's misunderstood. You can be confused by many things in this. Now, I don't think that it's necessarily bad. I think that if you don't understand what you have your hands on, that it can result in bad outcomes. Please, Bruce.
Would you feel like most people who are trying to sell their firm would go to this model? Because I feel like, I kind of just agree with what he said, is it makes it seem like you're going off the market, right? And majority of the time you're going to go off the market if it's like something that's been a high purchase. If not, you're going to take the other route. And so why would someone who wants to purchase a firm or find the valuation of a firm use this?
Why wouldn't they?
Why would they? Because personally, if I'm valuing a firm, I'm not going to want them to go off like the market, because I'm just saying like, oh yeah, they got lucky, that company sold for X bill. You know what I'm saying? And
Well, if you're trying to sell your firm, you're
would
never
want it.
thinking that all the others got lucky.
yeah, so
Okay,
I'm saying you would go with that, but if you're trying to buy it.
But either way, okay, you never assume that everything else was lucky unless you really understand what's going on. So Colton discussed last week with you, was it Pratt Stats or Deal Stats or PitchBook?
Deal stats.
Deal Stats, okay. And Pratt Stats and Public Stats about 2 months ago became Deal Stats. They merged into one base and became Deal Stats, okay? And so you can find all these market comparables during whatever period of time for different firms in different industries. And we're going to spend some time in that software on Monday, okay? So you would want to use it because it's easy. So here we have Zach, and Zach, as it turns out, is an extraordinary business owner that he's developed an app, and it helps us understand exactly the right type of running shoe to use for the right type of body, right style of walking gait. It'll even videotape someone walking in their gait and helps them understand what their shoe should look like. I don't know, just going off the top of my little head, right? Because you're really good at that, Zach, and you're the owner of the company, you're the CEO, CFO, everything, because you are the deal, right? Are you necessarily great at valuation analytics? If you're this other guy?
Probably not.
In fact, you probably don't even know what those words mean when coupled together, right? You may know every word that I said, but not know what I'm talking about, okay? So, but you're the one. You want to know the value. You're the one who's got to make the decisions. So are you going to use one of these behemoth models that we can move out to 15, 20 different terms and all kinds of exponents calculating this and that and the other thing? Or are you going to go to the simplest, most commonly used thing you can find?
Most common.
Path of least resistance, and that's why.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Now, why would you not want to use it? Because it's the simplest, most commonly used one you can find. And the path of least resistance doesn't always get us to the best place, right? Okay. Okay, so if this is the case, is there a reason that we should think that the forward market multiple model for any given asset should realistically yield the same exact number or outcome for the value of the asset as any other model? It's the same asset, right, Alex? The asset hasn't changed. I don't know why its value should be different, right? So let's go ahead, and the assumption we made here that these two are the same, let's go ahead now and apply this. Can we do that?
Theoretically.
All I've done is I've used this model. Yeah, theoretically, thank you. Spoil sport. What we're about to try to get to is what rate of growth is embedded in that multiple. So we're going to try to rearrange this whole equation to solve for G. Now you might think that this is a continuation of this G solution discussion that we had the other day, and that you might think about what G is embedded in the value of a company to determine whether or not you want to buy it. And that's true, you could use it for that. All I'm trying to do at the moment is to help you understand when you see someone use a markup multiple, I'm trying to help you understand how you can identify what rate of growth is built into that multiple. Because we saw 12.74, but that didn't tell us what the rate of growth expectation was, did it? We just saw 12.74. So I don't know what it means yet. So let's figure out what it means. Yeah, Zach?
Real quick, are you using EBIT, like a forecasted EBIT at the
Yep.
first period of the?
So this is, because that's a continuation term always uses some notion or type of cash flow from the first year of the continuation period. Yep, exactly. And I don't care which of the models it is we're looking at, even economic profit. They all, for the continuation or terminal value, are built in some measure off the expected cash flow or some element of the expected cash flow in that first period following the explicit period.
I might be jumping the gun a little bit, but so if we're taking EBIT from a forecasted series of EBITs, wouldn't it just be reflected in the same like growth rate that the company's seeing in the revenues?
Well, you might think that, right? So, and that's exactly what we're about to challenge. Because when I put some numbers to this in a few minutes, we're going to bring up a spreadsheet with numbers and I'm put some numbers to it. You're going to see that's not exactly the case because there's more going on there. Okay. All right. So let's now try to go ahead and simplify this equation so we can isolate on the G variable. If I divide both sides of the equation by the sum of FCF divided by 1 plus R to the T, I get rid of that term from both sides, right? In fact, actually what I did was it became 1 plus on each side. you with me there? If I divided it by itself, it became 1, and now it's 1 plus. So now if I subtract 1 from each side, I'm just left with 2 equations, right? Nod your head or shake your head. Thank you, thank you. A little hard for me to tell with you guys sometimes. Now Kira stares at me here. She's got this just kind of stare going on. Okay. Okay, now if I multiply each side by 1 plus r to the t, I get rid of the super denominator, don't I? Pardon me?
No,
Yeah, when you grin and point at me, it's something. I'm trying to figure out what you're laughing at now.
Crazy how
Okay?
small.
Are we okay? All right. I want to isolate G. Okay? So now I'm going to take this, and I'm going to multiply both sides by r minus G. They got rid of that, didn't it?
do you have to keep that term together, or could you just multiply both sides by r?
No, I had to keep it together, because it's bracketed. Yep, have to keep it together. But we're about to be able to disaggregate. What do I do next? I'm trying to isolate G.
Divide by n times EBIT.
Divide by m times EBIT. So now I can get rid of my brackets. And then what can I do? Subtract r, right? But when I subtract r from this side and from this side, I'm left with a negative g. I prefer to have a positive g, okay? How do I do this and end up with a positive g?
Divided by minus 1.
Pardon me?
Divided by minus 1.
Uh-huh. Which is going to result in, instead of subtracting r, I'm going to take r minus this, and that then has left me with a positive g.
Wait.
Okay? Let me walk it through step to step, so you get it.
Was that the negative one you did?
Yeah, kind of. So, okay, so instead we can say FCF1 divided by m times EBIT minus r equals minus g. That's where we're about to head, right? How do I now turn this into positive on the side I'm trying to solve for? If I multiply this by negative 1, it then becomes negative FCF and positive r to get to positive g.
Jeez.
I hope you're making note of this. Okay, cool. So we've just gone ahead and identified how we can figure out what the g is in this multiple. Now, the multiple's still here, right? It has to still be here in order to figure out what the g is inside of it. Okay? Does that make sense to you?
And this is assuming we have all the other variables.
Yeah, we have all the other variables. In fact, we might have even had some g that got to that first left-hand side of the equation. Right? We had to have, right? Because we had a whack minus g, an r minus g going on there. Yeah.
And the original equation you started out with, could you write that on the board one more time?
Say again?
Could you write the original equation that you came to, just
Sure.
the very starting
No,
point?
no problem. So we may have to go back and forth to it a few times. Is it okay if I start with the one where we set the forward markup multiple
That's
equal
what,
to?
yeah, that's what I'm
Okay,
talking
all
about.
right. So to get this, we're suggesting that the free cash flow model should give us an equal outcome to the forward markup multiple model. And the multiple that we're using in this case is the EBIT multiple. Okay? Yeah, Ryan?
Can we assume that if we had set the forward market multiple value equal to the KVD model, the G that we would have as a result would be the exact same as when we
Yeah,
set it to
we
the-
can. We can. That's why I started with free cash flow and KVD. But since I had also started by showing you the algebraic components of the multiple through the KVD model the other day, that's why I wanted to start with it. But you can make that assumption.
Can we also assume that it's equal if we set it to the APV model?
Yes, but there's another complication there. And that is, I've offered you the simplifying assumption when you use the adjusted present value model that weighted average cost of capital can equal K tax, KU, and KD. But if you think about that, it doesn't make sense. Because when you have those discount rate variables equal each other, then the free cash flow model should not equal the APV model, because the APV model is the free cash flow model plus more cash flow. So something plus more can't equal something, the same something, right? So and it's that problematic assumption that the discount rates are equal that begats that. The only reason I told you that you can go ahead and use those discount rates being equal to each other is so that you didn't have to try to figure out how to calculate KU, K-tax, and KD. Remember our discussion about those being somewhat problematic to calculate? And that's the only reason we use them. It doesn't hold water, but it's the simplest way for you to see how to manipulate the model, okay? Without making you do yet more. Cole?
So you talked earlier that the free cash flow and then the market multiples that they are like theoretically going to be the same. Is the growth going to be affected by that? Like, is it 100% accurate, or is there some level of variation because of the level or the difference between the two values?
Yeah, good question. So let's come back for half a moment to free cash flow model and KVD model being the same. We know that they are the same when the G and the ROIC interaction is appropriate and reflective, right?
So same thing.
Same thing. So the forward market multiple model is going to equal the free cash flow model when the G and ROIC interaction are the same. Where in this model do you see G and ROIC? I don't see it, do you? And I know letters, I've seen them before. They happen to be embedded in this little beast right here, the multiple itself. So what that's really saying is, if the multiple we're choosing to use is going to be supported by the G and ROIC that we used on the other side, then they will be equal to each other. And if they're not, they won't. And you're about to see a condition in which they are not. Okay? And then we'll reconcile it so you can see where they are. Okay? Are we good? Sort of, kind of, almost? Okay, so we ended up with this equation. I'm going to go ahead and do it like this, so it's a different place on the board. R minus, going to give us that. Now I can get rid of this. And I just want you to note and remember this, so that as we now look at some numbers in evaluation, you can then see what's going on here, okay? And these, by the way, are the exact same numbers you've been using in your Excel assignments. So they should be at least modestly familiar to you.
Rick?
Yeah,
And you said that this model is not, like, you put the name for this model, there's a bunch of different names you've heard?
yeah, it's, I I never hear this model form given a name. It's commonly thought of as just using a multiple to get a value. So you might say it's the multiple model, but in this case, we're using a multiple and we're applying it somewhere in the future. I called it the forward market multiple, it could have been called the future market multiple. It's just a name I gave it because I wanted to give it a name.
Cool. Okay.
Okay.
Just like,
You're welcome to copyright it, make some money off of it, you know, give it to my great-grandchildren. Okay. So you guys probably recognize exactly where I'm at, right? Okay. You'll notice, and we'll go back to them in just a minute, we have to pick some of them up. You'll notice that we had our entire forecast up there, and that forecast included EBIT, and it included no plat, and it included free cash flow. And in this case, I'm using a value with adjustments. We can do the exact same thing and think about a value without adjustments. It's just some metrics and it's algebraic manipulation. Okay? So in this case, we know that we have this continuing value of 171.737. And here in the KBD model, we have a continuing value of 148.82. In the free cash flow model, we have a continuing value of 154.74. So they are not only different, but the one for the market multiple model is yet more different than the other two are different from each other. We have a difference of 6 here, less than 6. We have a difference of almost 20 as we go from here to those, right? So a big difference. And we know that the only way that kind of difference can exist is if there is a greater expectation of growth of the firm's resources, the firm's free cash flow, right? Because the EBITs are the same, everything else is the same. So what's driving that? Well, what's driving it is the multiple, because the growth rate is embedded in or inherent in the multiple. So let's think about some of these numbers for a second. Let's actually write them down so we can use them in a minute. So I think in this case, I'll make this smaller. Not that small. Come on. Secure, I'm not sure how you did this. How'd you do that? What button did you push for it to do that?
Click the one, that one, yeah.
This one?
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Control and then scroll, or just. I think what we had was like a grid plan.
Yeah. Which was not my intention, but it is what I ended up doing. Okay, so what variables are we needing to find? We need to find R. We need to find the EBIT for time 1. What else is in that left side of that equation that you wrote down? Pardon? Yep, the multiple. I think FCF was there as well, right? So we need to find these values. So R in this case is our WACC at 5.52%. Our EBIT for time 1 is 13.459. Our free cash flow for time 1 is 3.905. And then we have an M somewhere. In this case, I used the market multiple that's observable in the base year. So I pulled it from the financial statement. Right there. And you guys will remember having constructed this yourselves. So I pulled it from there. Okay? So it's 12.76. So what we're about to do is identify, in the case of this company, with this R, EBIT, and free cash flow, what growth rate must be built into this multiple to get the outcome we're after, or that we've observed. Fair enough? Yes?
is the 12.76 the EV over EBIT. Sorry, I can't read that.
That is EV, yeah, when you guys did this, it was
Yeah.
EV EBIT.
Okay, perfect.
Exactly. Now, we could do this exact same thing with any enterprise value multiple. EV over EBITDA, EV over revenue, EV over free cash flow, EV over your grandmother's number of toenails. It really makes no difference as long as it's an enterprise value multiple. And we select the appropriate cash flow variant when we're trying to make the selection, right? Does that make sense? Nod or shake. Oh, I see very little light there, okay. We'll spend a few minutes. Okay, so with that, let's go back to this without, and see what we can do. So all I'm doing is motivating this. Okay? By the way, what growth rate did we use, or have you been using in this,
3%.
yep. Exactly. Keep that in mind. This is going to try to answer the question one of you asked a few minutes ago. I think it was Zach about, well, isn't it just reflected with the growth rate? I said maybe not. Okay? So that's the one that was used to get the values that we built here. Okay? So think about this. 0.0552 is equal to 3.905 divided by 12.76 times 13.459. No, excuse me. That's a negative, is going to equal our G. If I'm doing my math right. That's always the question. Yeah, Brigham?
Never mind, never mind.
Okay? So, what is, what's 12.76 times 13.459?
171.737.
171.737. And what is 3.905 divided by 171.737? It's 0.02274. And if I now subtract that from 0.0552, I end up with 0.03246. That's not 3%. It's a different number. Does that surprise you? Is it a problem? What do you think? How do we reconcile this? Go ahead.
Well, because we have our growth rate of G, which is reflecting the growth in our cash flows. Or whatever.
Yeah, but that's kind of what we used over here.
Right, but when all other things are growing at slightly different, like our expense can be growing at a different rate.
I love that you're trying to think this through, but once again, the elephant in our room is invisible to us. What was the difference in the outcome of the free cash flow model's value versus the outcome of the market multiple model's value? It was a difference of 152 to 171, wasn't it? So I think the free cash flow model gave us a value of about 152. The FMM model gave us a value of 171 and point something on each case. Okay? That's the difference. So we used the form of the free cash flow model to then find this number, which would then suggest that if we want the forward market multiple model and the free cash flow model to end up with the same value, we should be able to use the 3.246 long-term G, and that should make our free cash flow model have the same value as the FMM model.
And the difference between the two G's is literally the 0.246 right now.
.246.
Okay.
Yeah, or, yeah, 0.246%. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to our spreadsheet. So I gave, by the way, when I wrote those numbers down, I gave you the wrong numbers altogether. The model outcomes, 91.5 and 14. This FMM gave us 114.95, and free cash flow gave us 91.5. Okay, still, the market multiple model gave us a higher value. Yeah.
The 91 is the
Oh, thank you. 101.95, no, thank you.
Wait, what?
Still, the market multiple gives a higher value, right? Okay, and I'm going to tell you, because the G inherent in the multiple that we selected is greater than the G that we used in the FCF model. So let's see what happens. We can see these values down here. Now let's go ahead and change this G to 3.246. 0.03246. And what happens to our values? Are they the same now? They're not, are they?
They're different.
They're different. Maybe that's because we used the with adjusts. No, they're still different. Why are they still different?
Well, in order for them to be the same, wouldn't you have to use two different G's for both models? Like, wouldn't you have to use G of 3% for free cash flow and 3.246 for forward model?
Let me think about that for a second.
Rather than using the same G.
Aren't they literally just like 101, 97?
Say that one more time.
Wouldn't you have to use a G of 3% for the free cash flow, to use a G of 3.246, whatever, for the forward model?
Possibly. Let me see. So here we just made the G the same, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't work for us. So let's take that back to 0.03. And instead of doing what you suggested, let's simply embed in the WAC minus G term 0.03246. Because I think that's the same thing that you're saying, right?
No, I'm saying you would need 3.246 for the forward model, not free cash flow.
Well, let's see what happens when we do this. Almost same number. What you're saying is just the opposite, but it has the same effect. So if I take this back and now come over here, I don't have a G over here anyplace. So I can't change this G, right? If I had a G here, I could have made this G 3% to match this G, and I would have gotten the same number, but because I don't have a G here, I can't do it. So I had to use this one, make it the same G that we estimated for the multiple, and then I could see that they were not exactly, but very close to the same.
Why was it wrong the first time you did it?
The first time,
Yeah.
when you say wrong, why did, when I changed this to point,
Why didn't it give you the same?
because when we go from here to here, going from here to here, we were, this was still at 3.246, and this was at 3.246, the way we embedded it. And so they were both moving at the same time.
Oh,
We can't do that, okay? But when we went ahead and said, okay, if the same G is employed, we should get the same number. Well, we effectively get the same number, 114.95. 114.73. Those aren't exactly the same number, are they?
It's because the G went out further than we saw.
Two reasons. My G goes out further, so that 3.24% or 3.246% that we calculated actually was 3.246 something, right? And remember that I used a WACC of 5.52%, which is not exactly the WACC. The WACC is 5.52 something. Okay? So it's this rounding scheme difference. It doesn't mean that we're wrong. It means that we don't have perfect numeric fidelity. If we took it to 4 decimal places or 8 or more, we'd come yet closer. But you'd have to take it to probably a dozen decimal places to get the exact same outcome. Do you ever take something to a dozen decimal places? That's just practically impossible. And why would you not bother to do so here other than the impracticality of it? It's an estimation, right? We know it's not right. We know that it's helping us close in on something that can be considered right. And in this case, a value that then can be negotiated by a prudent buyer and seller. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's go back and look at just this a little bit more, and then we'll go on to the problem set. We got a good amount of time. Cool. I'm going to undo this, because all I want to do is show you, as we talked about the other day, what happens when you add some meat on the bone of this valuation using the market multiple model. Can you see these numbers well enough? Bobby, can you read these from back there?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. So you don't see in this number expressly what the multiple is, so I went ahead and showed it to you right here, okay? And now what I want to do is I'm just going to briefly, well, let me explain what's happening, which I think you probably already understand, but then I want to manipulate a little bit. So here, remember, it's the sum of the free cash flows of times I divided by 1 plus the discount rate to the t. Here are the free cash flows. You're used to them. Here is their discounted values. You're used to them. Here is the present value of those discounted cash flows. You're used to this. It's the exact same ones we've got going on over here. Nothing is different. Such that the present value of the discounted cash flow is also not different. It should be consistent. The only thing different really is this continuing value. In this case, the continuing value is, now let me recode it for you so it's more obvious. R36. So notice when I recoded that, the number didn't change, but now it helps you see that it's using this multiple times this EBIT.
Why do you want to use the EBIT for the continuing period?
Why would we?
Yeah.
Because a continuing value, a terminal value, always uses the cash flow or a cash flow variant from the first year of the continuation period. Because that's the whole basis of that estimation. Remember, harken back to the dividend yield model, or dividend growth model. P0 equals D1 divided by R minus G. So that's kind of like our holy grail-ish sort of thing, if you will. Okay, please.
So why do we find the multiple for year 0 instead of year 1?
Because it's the only multiple we had the ability to observe. Okay, for year 1, did we know what the enterprise value was? We hadn't forecasted. So we had it for year 0. And this comes to the heart of where we go next, though, Mikkel. If you want to use a multiple of 8.5, and I want to use a multiple of 9.5, are either of us necessarily wrong? No, what we're saying is we believe a multiple of 8.5 or 9.5 is a reasonable multiple to use. So in this case, I decided that a reasonable multiple to use was the last one we observed for the company. I have some good foundation for that because we know the company had achieved it. So if it had it once, it can have it again, right? Do I believe the company might be able to achieve a greater multiple than 12.76? Well, maybe if we can improve our operating metrics, our management, which will improve our free cash flow, which will be represented in the growth of free cash flow. Do I maybe sometimes think that that multiple of 12.76 is an aberration and it's too high? Maybe. Because remember how it was found. We looked at the enterprise value in the base year, year 0, and compared to the EBIT in year 0. And the enterprise value in year 0 was a function of some of the market metrics that we observed, not a function of an estimation, right? A function of a market metric. We took the market cap of the common plus the market cap of the preferred plus the market value of the debt and subtracted cash. That's how we got the enterprise value. But it was built on these market values. Is it possible that in that year, the market somehow ascribed a multiple that was a little ambitious for this company, that was unusually high? What would cause that? Right? What would cause the market to do that?
If they just had a big contract that they were awarded, maybe if they were a defense contract, and they just had a big government contract for that year.
And the public is aware of it,
Yeah.
and so the public investors, have an expectation that great things are in the future for this company, right?
So for that year, you could expect the multiple to be higher, however that went.
Well, and the multiple is really only something we observed in that year, right? And so we can observe that the multiple was higher because market expectations were higher. Market expectations being high, does that always equate to great performance in the following years? In fact, honestly, isn't it sometimes just the opposite? When market expectations get really high, isn't it hard for the firm to meet those expectations? And isn't it likely to disappoint in future years? Right? I'm reasonably confident that the market multiples in place in 1999 and early 2000, which were high, proved themselves to be completely unrealistically high by the time 2001 and 2002 were upon us, right? .com crash. Please no. Pardon?
What about now?
Well, I don't even want to talk about it now, because we all have money at stake now, and it just frightens me, which I think is the answer to your question, right? Yeah. I'm very concerned about how high the market is. It's a function of low cost capital more than anything else, I think. Okay, so we just used 12.76 willy-nilly, but we had a foundation for it because we observed it once. I think if you're going to use a number, you ought to have a better foundation for it. So let's go back to our valuation and see what we can do. Okay. So remember we pulled 12.76, gives a 171 multiple, or value. Maybe I'm the investor thinking to buy this asset. The seller might be reliant upon this, just like the seller's reliant upon WACC, right? But I'm an investor, and I'm thinking, yeah, you know, you guys had a 12.76 multiple, but I believe that the last time you were valued, that multiple was too high. Something was going on at that point that I don't think is going to play out for your future, is what I'm saying, right? So I don't think we should use 12.76. I think we should use 10.5. And the number falls, right? Bobby, on the other hand, he's the one that owns the company that had the 12.76, says, Rick, I think you're up in the night. I believe that that was our worst year. That was our low point. And in fact, we're going to be able to achieve a multiple of 15. And look what happens to the value. When you say that, what you're saying is, I believe the growth of our cash flows will be even greater than that 12.76 inferred. And the 12.76 inferred 3.52% growth. Right? Is 3.52 a big deal? Not really. I mean, that seems like a pretty vanilla oatmeal kind of number to me. I'm not excited about 3.52% anything. If we look back through the last 40 or 60 years of the market, what kind of long-term growth of free cash flows do we see? 2.5% to 3%. So all of a sudden, 3.52 does seem like a bigger number, right? And for Bobby to say, I think this thing can be 15 instead of 12.76, he's saying, I think the growth of our free cash flow is going to be even more robust. And the only way for that to happen is either to have a greater growth in revenues or a lesser growth in expenses, which is going to come about by greater management and or market conditions. Come back to all those elements that we thought about that give us growth. Remember when we talked about what creates growth for a company? Organic, inorganic, M&A, endogenous, exogenous, scale, macroeconomics, whatever it happened to be, R&D. And we go back to those same culprits. What we didn't talk about when we looked at growth for a company was the effect of management. So if we've got corporate enterprises, and Bobby and his buddies over the last 20 years have been running this thing for a while, and you're doing okay, Bobby. The thing's got a value. You become a wealthy man in the process. Are you okay with that? I figured you'd be okay. Mikkel and Sherry and Garrett, on the other hand, they look at your company, you and your cronies the last 20 years, and say, oh, come on. We can do better. And put our management team in place, and we'll do better. We didn't talk about that as a way to have growth in the company. But do we believe, as a market, that new management can bring about greater growth? What do you think, Alex? Do we believe that?
Could.
We could. Do we ever see evidence that the market believes that?
Yes.
When do we see it? I agree with you.
I don't know, just a little example of that when Apple actually bring back, what's his name?
Steve Jobs?
Yeah, Steve Jobs, and then the growth rate actually went up like huge.
Well, and when Apple brought back Steve Jobs, immediately the stock price jumped, which was indicative of an expectation the growth rate would grow. And in fact, it did. I think that's a celebrity, kind of an outlier example of what we're talking about, because Steve Jobs had become and remained such a celebrity. I mean, he was a talisman in the markets, right? So let's get a little bit more commonplace. When Ray Nardelli took over Home Depot, what happened to the Home Depot stock? Do any of you know? This is now some years ago. There's been a lot of business cases written about this. It jumped by almost 25%. Just because Ray Nardelli. Who was Ray Nardelli? By the way, who was Ray Nardelli? If I remember correctly, he came out of GE. Okay? And GE's always been, often been, a star in the markets, not always. Okay? So when markets see new management has been put in place, especially if it's management that they think has a reason to be successful, they suppose growth is going to increase and it gives a greater value to the stock. And we know when the stock has a greater value, the enterprise value of the company is bigger, right? Because that's what we're really focused on, is enterprise value. That's what we're estimating. Please agree.
This might be off topic, but do you feel like, it might be too much off topic, but if Facebook got rid of Zuckerberg entirely, do you think it would go down or up? Just off of speculation.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand what you said.
Management
Are you
team.
asking me if I believe that if Mark Zuckerberg were replaced by some other manager, that Facebook's value would go up or down?
Yeah.
Well, he's kind of a punk, right? Disrespectful. Eschews convention. Has not been terribly complimentary to the investment banking complex. And that by itself would cause you to think that replacing him might improve the value of the stock. He led the company through some pretty problematic periods, including fake news, political manipulation, etc. Some horrible privacy policies. It might make us think that the thing would go up, right? replace him, let's put Cole Stratton there instead. He's certainly going to do at least as good a job, if not better. But I respect you, Cole, and I consider you a friend,
I'm no Zuckerberg.
but Mark Zuckerberg today, you're not. 10 years from now, absolutely. Today, maybe not. Don't forget Mark Zuckerberg's the guy that maybe borrowed this from the Winklevoss twins. Maybe, maybe not. The $800 million settlement would suggest he did. Okay. But he created this puppy, right? And so you can't completely divorce those two guys. The guy that managed over the last year and a half versus the guy that brought it to where it is. Can't completely divorce those two. But he's awfully controversial. And his time may have run out.
So then that kind of comes to my second point. You could argue it both ways, right?
Yeah,
And so,
all of this you can argue both
and
ways.
so at the end of the day, is it kind of mob mentality when you see a management change is just going to be what the market's, because I feel like you can argue almost, like not all cases, but most, you can argue, hey, he's good for the company and vice versa. And so I feel like when it comes into like valuing the company based off of that, or getting a higher multiple, I don't know. I'm just curious.
Before I answer that question, I want to hear your comment.
I was just gonna say, I think the sentiment from if Zuckerberg hypothetically were to step down would probably be the same as like if Elon Musk were to.
Yeah, and in fact, honestly, Cole, that's exactly what's running through the back of my head. Because we got the same kind of dynamic. Musk is the visionary, the one that's brought the Tesla SpaceX, electricity thing to where it is. But at the same time, if he would close his mouth every once in a while, it might be helpful to the shareholders, right? Okay. So I think these guys are not altogether different guys. If Musk was replaced, would it improve the value of the stock? My guess is if Musk was replaced, it would devolve the value of the stock. Because I think the visionary part of Musk is perceived by the market to be more important than the guy that shoots his mouth off, right? I'm not sure that's true for Zuckerberg. But maybe the board of directors and their decisions should tell us whether they think it's true or not. Have they replaced him? No. I think they think their stock is more valuable with him there. Do you guys know anything about the holding of Facebook stock that would suggest that Zuckerberg can override the board? I don't. Do you guys? Because it's not a stock that I paid. I don't hold Facebook. Purposely. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so back to where we're talking. I might think about this number at 12.76 because I observed it. But what if I observe that number for this company for a particular year, and now go back in and look at that number every time it's been observable, and then take the average and find that, well, in fact, it really was only about 10 on average. Or I go ahead and I look at other firms like this one in the industry and say, they on average are about 11.5. Look at the forward market multiple value versus the free cash flow value now. Imperceptibly different, right? 101.98, 101.96. Insignificantly different. Which is suggesting to you that if this 101.96 value is accurate, and if it were to be a market value, it would be reflective of a multiple of 11.5. Zach?
I guess, so you were just saying taking like an average of multiples, right?
Uh-huh.
Why would you ever not do that? Because if you're observing a multiple from 1 year, you're trying to say that this is going to reflect in perpetuity because this is a continuing.
That's a great question. General Electric. Is General Electric the same company today it was 20 years ago? No. So if I took the average multiple that General Electric had been observed to have over the last 20 years, I would be applying that multiple to an admittedly different company today. Does that sound like a good idea? No, it doesn't. But does it also sound like a good idea to take a multiple from what might just be a good year and apply it to the company going forward in perpetuity? How do we reconcile this stuff?
Estimation.
Estimation?
But if you're estimating the multiple forecasted years, again, we're going back to like you're making an estimation on an estimation.
I think you can answer this in a very simple question. What are you guys not? Well, that too. You're not monkeys. You're not monkeys, right? Didn't we start out by saying you are not a monkey? You're not monkeys. You can think beyond just the obviouses, right? In fact, one of the problems we've had today is I said there's been an elephant in the room twice that you couldn't see because you guys were trying to think beyond the obviouses, which I think is tremendous, right? You're not monkeys. So when somebody says 12.76 and says, well, that's the average of the last whatever, or it's the best year we've ever seen, or it's the most recent, you're going to think beyond that and say, well, what if, how about, and you're either going to defend that number or you're going to come up with a different one. And you're going to come up with it because you're psychic. Or more importantly, maybe, because I'm not sure you're all psychic, you have the ability to artistically interpret. Have you seen that transition being made in yourselves over the last couple of months? Could you have interpreted free cash flow 2 months ago? You're all over it today, right? Could you have interpreted WAC? Frankly, could you have calculated well enough to interpret? Okay? So you're well along the route to not being a monkey. You got some ways to go, because so do I. Any questions about all of this? So on Monday, we're going to go ahead and look at particular firms and particular industries and find some of the way you observe their multiples through deal stats, maybe even through PitchBook. Because they don't necessarily publish the multiple you're trying to deal with. Okay? But you can see them there. All right? So with that, I'm going to hand out the next problem set, talk about it for a couple minutes, maybe even work on it a little bit. We don't have a lot of time. For some reason I have way too many of these.
Bobby, you last one. Nickel? Nickel?
So you guys have been working on you've been working on the Farm Hill Group for over a month, haven't you? You've seen Farm Hill Group's numbers in a couple of different ways. This is the spreadsheet that you've been building in your Excel examples. The next problem set, if I remember correctly, is using the forward markup multiple, and you're going to be using Leland Manufacturing when you do that. Somebody asked me yesterday afternoon how you go from one of these problem sets I give you where you really only have a screen capture of the numbers, right? You don't have the spreadsheet with the numbers in front of you necessarily. How you go from that to using this spreadsheet you're building and have it give you accurate outcomes. What you do is you put the numbers for the new case you're looking at into the financial statement that you have in your model. And you may need to make some adjustments because maybe what you're looking at has 3 revenue categories versus the one you modeled had 2, or it has 7 expense categories versus 5. So you got to make some adjustments. Maybe you're looking at something for 3 years of explicit versus your model had 5. So you got to make those kinds of structural adjustments. But once you've done so, then the next thing you do is you make sure that you've got the same kind of expected adjustments, best owner premium-like adjustments, in your forecasts. And that then should bring you to the point where the model has given you the right outcome. Please.
Pretty sure that we're still with Farm Hill Group on both assignments. The DCF/KVD that's due on the 7th is Farm Hill Group, and then the FMM models is Farm Hill Group. So.
I think FMM, I don't have it with me, but I'll
Like
look at it real quick.
the screenshots in Canvas have Farm Hill Group on it, and it matches up.
No, Yeah, you're thinking about the next Excel assignment, right?
Yeah, but
I'm saying the next ICP. You're right, the Excel assignments are always Farm Hill. They
Yeah,
never change.
but-
It-
Okay, maybe I'm just looking at the wrong. The next ICP, that the solution set, the one you just gave us, is Farm Hill Group. So maybe it's the one in next week. I don't know. Maybe I'm probably just reading it wrong. It's all good.
Maybe, I'll look at it.
ROIC one.
Yeah, because the
Oh,
forecast.
okay, yeah, I think that is still Farm Hill, if we go to the one.
I think it's one more week.
It's maybe one more,
Okay.
sorry.
No, you're good. I was just making sure.
Okay, all right, so read this for a second, and let's talk about it a little bit more. Because you've not yet read the Farm Hill Group, you've only done the Farm Hill Group in the Excel assignments, right? Okay. So read the Farm Hill Group for a minute. Which, by the way, is going to help you understand a little bit better about some of the numbers you've been using in your Excels. But there is a difference. As you're reading through this, you're going to see how we got to that 8.6% growth rate. It's only been given to you so far. In fact, you'll see how we got to all of the assumptions. What this assignment is designed to do is force you now to integrate your worksheets into one spreadsheet, so you have one cohesive model. Okay. I say force you, rather than force you, it encourages you. So, any questions as you're reading through it? You have a minute to finish the first page. When you look at this in detail, you're going to see that this one, I think, starts at 13-14, years 2013-2014. I think that the years in your Excel assignment show differently, but that's irrelevant. So let's think about what starts to come at you in the questions. If you have accurately represented your financial statement in the Excel assignment, then calculating no plat, invested capital, ROIC, and WACC for the base year should be already done for you, right? Just make sure that when you're looking at that spreadsheet you've developed, that the numbers you're using there and the numbers you're using here are the exact same numbers. I think they are, if I remember correctly. Please.
We're going without best owner, right? For all these numbers. Like, you know.
Yeah, so for the base year, there is no adjustment.
True. Okay.
Yeah. We're going to think about adjustments afterwards.
Okay.
And then we go on, what's the market value of Farm Hill's bonds? We'll kind of talk that one almost to death, right? You can calculate it. And why this time I just expect you to put in the inputs and let your model do the work for you. Number 3, what's Farm Hill's enterprise value? You already have that. Number 4, provide a well-reasoned top-down, a detailed 5-year revenue projection. And so from the story on the first page, you can pull out things like, I think they're going to have an increase in sales of 2% from a remodel line. I think they're going to have an expected market increase from the industry generally of 6%. And I think we said in there in the first page that we think that Farm Hill should be expected to have a proportional increase over and above the market of 10%, which is, since it's proportional, it's 10% of 6%. You might pull some other things out of the first page that you think are credible to change the growth rate of this company. And if you do, use those numbers. But I would encourage you, just for the sake of making sure your model structure is good, to also use the 8.6 so you can match my numbers. Please, Zach.
What's that 3.5%
What did it say again?
And
Oh, you're on the first page. Which paragraph are you in?
The third paragraph, middle of it, modest healthy national expansion of 7.4%.
Okay, so this is the second sentence of the third paragraph. The market for automatic overhead doors, like the residential and commercial construction market, is forecast to have annual revenue increase of 6% over the next 5 to 8 years, and then 3% thereafter. And it's reflective of a modestly healthy national expansion of 3.5%. So we're looking at a modest national expansion of GDP of 3.5%. Do we use both the 6 and the 3.5?
So it's just saying that 6 encompasses the expected.
It already has the 3.5 embedded in it. Because if we're looking at a whole nation growing at 3.5%, but this industry is expected to grow at 6, that 6 is in part a function of the 3.5% already.
Now,
Don't double count it.
how is that reflected? Because that's not saying that really this industry is growing on its own at a 2.5%, or is that what it's saying? Like this industry alone.
No, I understand exactly what you mean. I think it is saying that this industry is growing at 2.5% nominal, greater than the GDP growth of the nation as a whole. So it's outperforming the nation's GDP change, right? Which simply means that it's an industry that's more in vogue and demand than some. It's an industry that's got more profit potential than some. Nickel?
No, it's
Okay. Number 5, you're going to do some forecast ratios. You know those like the back of your head. Just make sure that they match what you got. Number 6, provide a forecast schedule, no plat, all these things. And so this is going to be your forecast that you've already got without adjustments. Number 7, I want KBD, FCF, forward market multiple models using a 5-year explicit period. You probably already have those built in, right? Or at least all but the forward market multiple one, and you should know how to do that now. Number 7, ask you to go ahead and, oh, that was number 7, excuse me. Number 8 says, given the values you've estimated, do you believe Farm Hill's reasonably priced in the current market? So you're going to be comparing your estimated value to the market value that we see now in its enterprise value. Is it appropriately valued in the market? Should be a pretty obvious answer to you. Then number 9, estimate the firm's value, the same models, but now using some adjustments that you might divine from the front page. And you've already got this set up in your forecast with adjustments worksheet. Okay? So really, I think the only thing you need to do to be able to affect this is include the FMM model in your spreadsheet. And once you've done that, you've effectively done what is necessary to do in the next, well, most of what's necessary to do in the next Excel assignment. Okay? Any questions? Okay.
When answering these, do you want us to do them in Excel and send you one spreadsheet, or do you want us to?
Good question. I want your answer in this. Okay, I think you're probably best served to upload it rather than bring it to me in paper, but you can do either. But what I want to make sure, yeah, why would you, right? You guys have this as a Word document in Canvas, so you can just go into your spreadsheet once you make sure all your numerics are right and copy and paste. Oh, you might have to type some words here and there, but I think you know how to do that too. Okay? And then save that and upload that. But if you're going to upload it, upload the spreadsheet as well. All right? Any questions? Okay. Are you going trick-or-treating tonight? Are you? Good for you. So I have the best of all Wednesday